If what you have been doing was actually working, you would not be here watching this. That is not an insult. It is clarity. At some point, you have visualized harder, affirmed louder, tried to raise your vibration, adjusted your thoughts, monitored your words, corrected your self-talk, and still, nothing moved in a way that felt solid or lasting. Maybe small things happened. Maybe you had brief surges of hope. But the real shift, the one you were expecting, never fully locked in. So instead of adding another technique to your list, let's address the real issue. Why it won't work. Not because manifestation is fake. Not because you are incapable. Not because you lack belief. It won't work when you are using it as a tool to escape your current identity. That is the hidden fracture. When you visualize from a place of deficiency, you are reinforcing deficiency. When you affirm from a place of panic, you are broadcasting panic. When you try to change your life because you cannot stand who you are right now, you are quietly anchoring yourself to that version. Energy follows identity and not desire. You can want something intensely and still repel it if the wanting is soaked in tension. You can repeat empowering statements all day long and still remain unchanged if internally you are arguing with them. You can watch every video, read every book, follow every method, and still be standing in the exact same internal position. And the internal position is the only thing that matters. The uncomfortable part is this. Results are not delayed by lack of effort. They are delayed by contradiction. If your outer words say, I trust, but your nervous system says, I am not safe, the nervous system wins. If your mind says, I know it's coming, but your body is scanning for proof every hour, the scanning is what solidifies. This is not about positivity. It is about coherence. Coherence means your thoughts, your emotions, your posture, and your expectations are aligned in the same direction. Not perfect, just aligned. When something will not work, it is almost always because you are still relating to your desire as something separate from you, something out there, something that must arrive, something that will complete you. And as long as it is out there, you remain here. This is the invisible wall. You are not manifesting from completion. You are manifesting from pursuit. Pursuit carries subtle pressure. Completion carries quiet stability. And here is what makes this difficult to see. Pressure feels productive. Stability feels passive. Pressure feels like action. Stability feels like surrender. So the mind keeps choosing pressure because it feels like movement. But movement without identity shift is just motion in place. If you want to understand why it won't work, examine this one question honestly. Are you trying to get something? Or are you allowing yourself to become the person for whom it is natural? There is a difference between desiring wealth and embodying someone who handles wealth calmly. There is a difference between wanting love and being someone who is emotionally available and secure. There is a difference between craving success and operating as someone who expects it as normal. The world does not respond to what excites you momentarily. It responds to what you normalize internally. And normalization requires something far less dramatic than most people expect. It requires emotional regulation. If you can only feel good when signs appear, you're training yourself to depend on evidence. If you can only feel confident when circumstances shift, you're still reacting instead of leading internally. What shifts reality is not hype. It is steadiness. This is why pushing harder fails. Pushing comes from urgency. Urgency comes from fear of not having. Fear of not having reinforces lack. You see how subtle this is? Nothing changes because you are still oriented around not yet. Even when you say you believe, your behavior reveals the timeline you are anchored to. Checking, waiting, interpreting silence, measuring progress, comparing timelines. All of that is still communicating absence. So instead of asking, how do I make this work? A better question is, where am I still operating from incompleteness? That is where the shift begins. Not in effort, not in volume, not in repetition, in identity. And until that changes, no amount of trying will produce the lasting result you are looking for. The reason trying harder keeps sabotaging you is because you are treating manifestation like a performance instead of a state of being. When you perform, you are attempting to generate a temporary emotional spike. When you're in a state, you are grounded in something that does not require constant maintenance. Performance is exhausting. Being is sustainable. And sustainability is what produces results that last. You cannot sprint your way into a new identity. You have to stabilize into it. Let's talk about what that actually means. In practical terms, if you want financial expansion, but every financial decision you make is filtered through anxiety, you are reinforcing scarcity even if you are saying abundance affirmations. If you want a relationship, but you are constantly monitoring someone's behavior for reassurance, you are reinforcing insecurity even if you are visualizing a healthy partnership. If you want recognition, but you hesitate to fully express yourself because you fear judgment, you are reinforcing invisibility even while claiming confidence. Nervous system is always more honest than the mouth's. Whatever feels most familiar internally is what you will unconsciously recreate externally. Manifestation does not respond to intensity, it responds to consistency. Intensity is dramatic. Consistency is quiet. Intensity makes you feel like you are doing something powerful. Consistency feels almost boring, but the external world reorganizes around what you repeatedly embody, not what you briefly declare. If you want something different, the question is not how to generate more emotional charge. The question is how to make the new state feel normal. Normal is powerful. If struggle feels normal, you will find ways to complicate progress. If peace feels normal, you will stop sabotaging momentum. If delay feels normal, you will unconsciously create waiting periods. If completion feels normal, you will begin acting from certainty instead of from proof-seeking. The subconscious does not operate on what is impressive. It operates on what is repeated. This is why chasing signs keeps you stuck. Every time you look for external confirmation that something is working, you are quietly reinforcing the assumption that it is not done yet. The habit of checking is a habit of doubt. Doubt does not mean you are broken. It means your identity has not stabilized into the new story. And stabilization requires something very specific: emotional neutrality. You do not need to be euphoric about your desire. You need to be calm about it. Calm is what signals safety. Safety is what allows expansion. When you are calm, you stop gripping. When you stop gripping, you stop interfering. When you stop interfering, momentum can build naturally. The paradox is that the less obsessed you are with the outcome, the more fluidly it can enter your experience. If you feel resistance rising right now, that is a good sign. Resistance is simply the discomfort of releasing control. The ego believes that control equals security, but control is often just disguised fear. And fear is contraction. Contraction blocks flow. Expansion requires openness. Openness requires trust. Trust is not pretending everything is fine. Trust is deciding that you are capable of navigating whatever unfolds. That shift alone changes how you relate to your desire. Instead of needing it to rescue you, you allow it to meet you. Instead of chasing it for relief, you cultivate relief first. Relief is the doorway to alignment. Not excitement, not desperation. Relief. Here is something practical you can begin doing immediately. Stop asking, when is it coming? And start asking, how would I move today if it were already settled? That question shifts your posture. It shifts your tone. It shifts your micro-decisions. If you truly believed something was handled, you would not be frantic. You would not overanalyze. You would not push conversations. You would not force timing. You would operate with steadiness. That steadiness is the bridge. And if what you have been doing has not worked, it is not because you are incapable. It is because you have been trying to override identity with effort. Identity always wins. Change the internal baseline, and the external world will follow. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped contradicting it. There is another layer to this that almost no one talks about, and it might challenge you if you have been deep in manifestation content for a while. The harder you try to get something, the more you are reinforcing the idea that you do not already have access to it. And access is everything. You do not manifest what you desire. You manifest what you feel permitted to experience. Permission is subtle. It hides inside your self-concept. If at a core level you still see yourself as someone who has to struggle, someone who has to earn worthiness, someone who has to prove value before receiving, then no amount of techniques will override that baseline. You will unconsciously create hoops to jump through. You will delay your own progress. You will feel like every win has to cost you something. That is not fate. That is programming. And programming can be rewritten, but not through force. You rewrite it by observing it without judgment. The moment you notice a thought like, "This is too good to last," or "Things never work out easily for me," do not fight it. Fighting a belief strengthens it. Instead, slow down and get curious. Ask yourself where that came from. Was it modeled to you? Was it reinforced through one painful experience that you generalized into a rule? Most of the beliefs running your life were formed before you had the maturity to question them. That means they are not absolute truths. They are interpretations. Manifestation feels hard when you're trying to outrun old interpretations instead of dissolving them. Dissolving does not mean denying. It means loosening your attachment. When a limiting assumption surfaces, you do not have to immediately replace it with a shiny affirmation. You can simply say, "That is a pattern, not my identity." That separation is powerful. It creates space. And space is where change begins. You also have to examine how you define success. If your definition of success is always just beyond where you are, you will never feel complete. Completion is not laziness. Completion is emotional stability. When you are stable, you are not chasing. You are creating. Chasing is reactive. Creating is directive. One is fueled by urgency. The other is fueled by clarity. Clarity reduces friction. When you are clear about who you are becoming, your actions align naturally. You stop taking steps that contradict your desired identity. For example, if you want to become someone financially secure, you do not just visualize wealth. You begin behaving like someone who respects resources. That might mean tracking expenses calmly instead of avoiding them. It might mean investing in skills instead of impulse purchases. It might mean raising your standards in negotiations. These are not dramatic shifts. They are quiet recalibrations. Those recalibrations compound. Here is something practical you can implement immediately. Pick one area where you feel blocked. Instead of asking, "How do I get this?" ask, "What version of me already has this?" Then write down 3 characteristics of that version. Not possessions, characteristics. Is that version decisive? Is that version patient? Is that version bold? Once you identify those traits, practice expressing one of them daily in small ways. Identity grows through repetition. This is not about pretending. It is about rehearsing. The brain cannot fully distinguish between a vividly imagined state and a repeatedly enacted one. When you begin acting from the new identity in manageable increments, your nervous system adapts. What once felt unfamiliar begins to feel accessible. What once felt distant begins to feel possible. And possibility is the doorway to tangible change. You have to understand that the universe does not respond to desperation. Desperation is contraction. It narrows your perception. When perception narrows, you miss solutions. You overlook timing. You misread signals. You interpret neutral situations as negative. Contraction distorts interpretation. Expansion widens it. When you relax your grip, you start seeing options you were blind to before. Conversations become opportunities instead of threats. Delays become redirections instead of rejection. That shift in perception alone can change outcomes without you adding more effort. Trying harder is often just an attempt to overpower fear, but fear does not dissolve under pressure. It dissolves under understanding. When you understand that you are not broken, that you are simply operating from old conditioning, something softens. And when you soften, you become receptive. Receptivity is strength. It takes maturity to stop forcing and start aligning. It takes courage to admit that more effort is not always the answer. It takes awareness to realize that you might be the one creating friction. But that awareness is liberating, not condemning. Because if you are creating the friction, you can also remove it. And removal does not require drama. It requires consistency. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to sit in neutrality instead of constantly reaching for the next emotional high. When neutrality becomes comfortable, manifestation stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a byproduct of who you are becoming. That is the shift that makes everything else possible. At this stage, it becomes necessary to confront something even deeper. something that quietly sits beneath every failed technique and every burst of temporary motivation. The real reason it feels like it will not work is because you're trying to control the outcome instead of stabilizing the identity. Control is exhausting. Identity is stabilizing. Control is about manipulating circumstances. Identity is about becoming the person for whom those circumstances are natural. There is a massive difference between chasing results and embodying alignment. When you chase, your energy is forward-leaning. It is tense. It is scanning. It is constantly asking, is it here yet? That question alone reinforces absence. When you embody, your energy settles. It becomes grounded. You move as someone who expects things to unfold, rather than someone who fears they will not. That expectation is not arrogance. It is coherence. Coherence is when your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors point in the same direction. If you say you trust the process, but check for results every hour, that is incoherence. If you claim abundance, but panic every time money leaves your account, that is incoherence. If you affirm love, but brace yourself for disappointment, that is incoherence. The subconscious does not respond to what you say. It responds to what you consistently signal. So part of this work is slowing down enough to notice your signals. Ask yourself, what am I emotionally broadcasting when I think about my goal? Tightness, urgency, fear, or steadiness? Quiet confidence? Neutral expectation? The goal is not to fake positivity. The goal is to reduce contradiction. When contradiction reduces, energy flows. Here is something practical that very few people apply. Emotional rehearsal without urgency. Instead of visualizing intensely and trying to generate excitement, practice sitting in the feeling of calm completion. Imagine the desire handled, resolved, normalized. Not dramatic, normal. This removes pressure from the nervous system. When your nervous system feels safe, it stops sabotaging. Safety is often the missing component in manifestation. If success subconsciously feels unsafe because it would mean visibility, responsibility, change, or the loss of old identities, you will resist it without realizing. You might procrastinate. You might overcomplicate. You might pick unnecessary fights, not because you are self-destructive, but because your system is protecting what it knows. To shift that, you must make the new identity feel safe. How? By taking incremental aligned actions that prove to your mind and body that change is survivable. If you want to be more visible, start by speaking up in low-risk environments. If you want more money, start by managing what you have with calm focus instead of avoidance. If you want healthier relationships, practice communicating clearly in minor conversations. Each small act signals safety. Repetition builds familiarity. Familiarity builds comfort. Comfort reduces resistance. And when resistance drops, results begin to surface naturally. Not because you forced them into existence, but because there is no longer internal friction blocking them. You are not waiting for a miracle. You are removing interference. There is also the matter of time perception. When something feels overdue, frustration grows. Frustration amplifies tension. Tension reinforces lack. Instead of asking why it has not happened yet, ask who you are becoming in the meantime. Growth is not filler. It is preparation. When you focus on strengthening your internal structure, the external structure has something stable to attach to. That is why quick manifestations often collapse. There was no internal framework to sustain them. Build the framework first. Strengthen discipline without harshness. Develop patience without passivity. Practice gratitude without performance. These are not abstract ideas. They are muscles. And the more you exercise them, the more natural expansion becomes. Manifestation feels difficult when it is treated like an emergency. It becomes fluid when it is treated like evolution. Evolution is steady. It is intelligent. It is responsive. You are not behind. You are adjusting. And the more you understand that your internal calibration determines your external experience, the less you will waste energy on frantic effort. You will begin to recognize that what you call delay is often refinement. Refinement sharpens clarity. Clarity strengthens belief. Belief stabilizes identity. Identity reshapes outcome. Nothing about this process requires aggression. It requires awareness. And awareness is something you can cultivate deliberately every single day. Notice where you are pushing. Notice where you are bracing. Notice where you are trying to outrun doubt instead of dissolving it. Then soften, not by quitting your goals, but by trusting your capacity to align with them. That trust changes your posture, it changes your tone, it changes your pace. And those changes ripple outward in ways that do not need to be dramatic to be powerful. This is where effort transforms into flow. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped fighting yourself. Now let's address something that almost no one talks about when they're frustrated with manifestation: emotional addiction. Not addiction to substances, not addiction to people, but addiction to familiar emotional states. If you have spent years operating in stress, urgency, doubt, or struggle, those emotions start to feel normal. And when something begins to shift in a calmer direction, your system may unconsciously try to recreate the old intensity simply because it is familiar. This is why some people sabotage progress right when things start improving. It is not because they do not want success. It is because success feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar can register as unsafe. Your nervous system does not care about your goals. It cares about predictability. So if unpredictability has been your pattern, you may unconsciously stir up chaos to restore what feels known. Understanding this changes everything. Instead of judging yourself when you slip back into overthinking, self-doubt, or pushing too hard, you begin to see the pattern with compassion. You recognize that you are not broken. You are recalibrating. And recalibration takes repetition. Here is something practical that can radically shift this. When you notice yourself escalating into stress about your desire, pause and deliberately regulate. Slow your breathing. Lengthen your exhale. Relax your jaw. Drop your shoulders. These physical signals tell your brain that there is no emergency. And when the body exits emergency mode, the mind stops chasing solutions out of fear. Manifestation feels hard when your nervous system thinks it is in danger. But when you stabilize internally, ideas surface more clearly. Opportunities become visible. Decisions feel less reactive and more intuitive. That intuitive clarity is not mystical. It is what happens when stress is not drowning out perception. There is also the matter of identity consistency. You cannot temporarily act like your future self and then revert to your old patterns the moment discomfort appears. Consistency does not mean perfection. It means returning to the mindset, returning to the perspective, returning to the belief. Every time you return, instead of abandoning the shift, you strengthen the new identity. And identity determines behavior far more than motivation ever will. Motivation is emotional. It fluctuates. Identity is structural. It persists. If you see yourself as someone who grows through challenges, setbacks become refinement rather than failure. If you see yourself as someone who is always behind, even success feels temporary. So ask yourself, who am I being while I pursue this desire? Am I being someone who trusts growth, or someone who demands proof before commitment? Am I being someone who builds patiently, or someone who panics at the first sign of delay? These are not small questions. They shape your trajectory. Here is another practical layer. Audit your daily micro-behaviors, not the dramatic ones, the small ones. How you speak about your goals, how you handle inconvenience, how you respond to minor setbacks. Those micro-responses either reinforce stability or reinforce chaos. Shift the micro-responses and the macro outcomes follow. If something goes wrong, instead of reacting with frustration, deliberately respond with curiosity. Ask, what is this teaching me? That single shift in posture rewires your relationship to difficulty. Curiosity dissolves resistance faster than force ever could. You also need to stop measuring progress only by external markers. Progress is not only the money in your account or the relationship status or the visible milestone. Progress is how quickly you recover from doubt. Progress is how steadily you hold perspective. Progress is how much less reactive you are than you were 6 months ago. Those internal shifts are the true evidence that alignment is forming. And alignment is cumulative. The reason the manifestation appears to not work is often because people abandon the process right before internal alignment stabilizes. They do the work for a week, feel better, then return to old patterns because nothing dramatic has happened yet. But alignment is not a vending machine. It is a buildup of congruent thought, emotion, and action. When congruence becomes habitual, outcomes become predictable. There is also a subtle but important truth here. You do not need to chase expansion. Expansion is a byproduct of coherence. When your internal world is no longer fragmented, the external world begins to mirror that unity. So instead of asking how to make it work, begin asking how to make yourself steady. Instead of asking why it has not happened yet, begin asking how you can deepen clarity. Instead of asking what is missing, begin asking where you are still gripping. This redirection of attention moves you out of desperation and into agency. Agency is powerful. Agency is calm. Agency does not need to shout. It moves deliberately. And that deliberate movement is what transforms manifestation from an emotional roller coaster into a grounded practice of becoming. When you stabilize identity, regulate your nervous system, and align micro-behaviors with long-term intention, you are no longer trying to bend reality. You are reshaping yourself, and reshaping yourself is always within your control. Everything else flows from there.